Thank you for coming down. I'm excited to present to all of you. This is podcasting as a marketing tool. I think we're all familiar with what a podcast is, but I'm hoping that after today, you can think of it through a different lens, through more of a marketing lens, and how you can amplify what your business is doing through the power of podcasting. Just a quick stat, 78% of Americans are now familiar with the term podcasting, and over 100 million people listen to podcasts monthly. That's kind of a big deal. I looked up when the phrase podcasting was first coined. It goes back to 2004, if the information I found was accurate. There was some reporter, hey John, there was some reporter who's credited for that phrase, putting iPod and broadcasting together. That's where it came from. And then in 2005, shortly after that, that's when Apple introduced podcasting into the iTunes ecosystem. And that's where you're able to subscribe to podcasts and seamlessly load them onto your iPods at the time through iTunes before it was all wireless and super easy. So given the amount of people that are familiar with what a podcast is, you can imagine how being part of that conversation can grow your brand trust and authority. So I'm hoping today you'll also walk away with an understanding of the value of what podcasting is in the marketing landscape, how you can use podcasting to build your brand and drive engagement. We're going to cover some high-level steps to launch and market a successful podcast. I definitely want to talk about the power of video podcasting and just give you a few tips for creating a compelling podcast if you feel so inclined. So when we talk about the value of podcasting, authenticity is number one. So, my notes here say that it builds trust through genuine conversations, and it does. When we're doing anything marketing related, as John was mentioning, Turn One Studio does a bunch of different things from website development to social media marketing, email marketing, etc. Podcasting is one form of that. In all of those forms, the intent through marketing is always to build authenticity and trust with the people that we're talking to. The special aspect of podcasting is that instead of consuming the written word, they're listening to your voice. And if you're doing a video podcast, they're watching you. They're connecting with you on a subconscious level. They're watching the micro movements in your face, the inflection in the tone of your voice. It's more than just the words you have to say. It's how you say it, and that's how you connect with folks. I personally do a lot of video things to market my business, and it's amazing. It's still amazing to me how often I'll run into someone and they feel like they know me already, even though we had just met for the first time, because they've been watching me in some animated fashion talking about something. It really goes a long way. When we talk about podcasting, we can't overlook the engagement aspect of it. Another stat here, podcast listeners spend an average of 30 minutes plus per episode. Now, why is that important? If we're talking about doing video marketing for your business, I'm going to be the first to tell you that if we're doing a talking head video, meaning you're looking into the camera and you're having a conversation with someone on the other end, you're doing a promotional video, etc., given the impatience and lack of attention on the internet, I'll be the first to tell you, we probably don't want to make that video too far longer than, say, 2 minutes, right? Obviously, if you have something compelling to say, it's not set in stone, but the shorter the better for those reasons. The reason why engagement is key in podcasting is that inherent in podcasting is the understanding that this is going to be a while. I'm tuning into something and I'm going to be engaged for a while. Some podcasts are 20 minutes, 30 minutes, some are 3-4 hours. Obviously, you'll have to have something compelling to say to last that long, but people understand this is not a quick hit. Accessibility. When you think about how iPod and broadcasting came together to make the word podcasting, it's clear, even if I didn't tell you that description, the comparison between podcasting and radio broadcasts. Radio has for decades been a very powerful way to get your message out because you're able to broadcast to many people. The fact that you're able to be in that space was very special. It gave you some street cred, right? Because there was only a finite number of slots available, either frequency-wise or time in a day, that you could take up to have that audience to listen to what you have to say. Podcasting changes that. Yeah, you're still broadcasting in a radio-like way, if that's the format you choose for your podcast. But now, it's available whenever people want to listen. I remember back in the day when a a band that I was interested in was doing something on a radio station, that I would pay attention to what time. I'm looking at my phone. We didn't have these back then. I would look at the clock, note that, oh, at 9 p.m. on this station, this radio, this band was going to do its thing, and I'd have my cassette player queued up to record it, right? And that was awesome. That was our way of doing on-demand back then. I could take that tape, put it in my Walkman, put it in my car, whatever. That magic's still relevant, but now I don't have to wait till when they broadcast. It's already there. I could go and watch it on my time. And what's also cool is I could binge prior stuff if I want to as well, and I could do this wherever I want. I could do this on my computer. I personally love doing this on my television. When I go home, putting YouTube on my TV is what I do first, and I'll watch podcasts on TV like it's a Netflix show. But if you're at the gym, if you're in the car, you're going for a walk, you can take this stuff with you and consume it when it's appropriate for you. And that's what's nice. People can make the time on their time to listen to your message. If this were BLI or whatever terrestrial radio stations are relevant to you, and you had a spot on it, you'd make a big deal about it. But if the audience you're reaching out to notify that you're doing this wasn't available at that time, or wasn't within the frequency range that radio station was broadcasting, your cool and important message would fall on deaf ears. Podcasting gets you past that. It's cost effective. When you think about what you can do, and I guess I'll dive into this a bit in detail later, but when you think about what you can do with that produced episode and all the episodes you produce, you'll quickly realize that there's a very high return on investment on that because of how you can use that, but I'll save that for later on. And of course, SEO benefits. So search engine optimization does play a factor in podcasting as it does for your websites. When you Google things, or if you were to go to a platform like Spotify and you put in certain keywords, I personally listen to a lot of marketing related podcasts and automobile podcasts. When I type in those words, I discover things. I discover podcasters that are out there that I would not have known otherwise. Then I'm amplifying, or they're amplifying their reach with people like me doing stuff like that. It's a very powerful attribute of podcasting. So when we talk about podcasting for branding, we talk about establishing your authority. I mentioned before, authority and trust and being genuine are key tenets of podcasting and branding in general. When it comes to podcasting, you position yourself as an industry expert because of what you have to say. So the platform gives you the power to say the things that you want to say and amplify it and get the reach that you're looking for. But you're that guy, right? You're the expert that's talking about these things, and people are seeing, oh, he knows what he's talking about. She knows what she's talking about. And that goes a long way for building a quality brand. It humanizes your brand. Again, blogging, I'm a big proponent for blogging as a marketing tactic. When used correctly, it is super duper powerful. But again, you're just reading. So you can write it in a conversational way and humanize it that way. But obviously, if they could hear you and see you in video or in an audio podcast, it adds that human element to your brand, which is super important. Building community. Again, inherent, baked into what a podcast is the opportunity to subscribe to it. That in itself gives you the understanding that there's more to come. So if this is something that I'm interested in, I could subscribe to it. I'll be notified when future episodes come out, and now I'm part of that community. When done correctly, and you're engaging your audience, and you could ask them to leave you a comment, and you have polls, and you have Q&A, and you're answering their questions, you're engaging them even more and building a stronger community. Obviously, it expands the reach, and now it's getting your content out to platforms that you might not otherwise be on. Stuff like Spotify and Apple Podcasts are huge. And networking from a hosting perspective, or even if you're a guest, but especially when you're hosting, it's an opportunity to collaborate with others, whether they're in your industry, in your field, or have nothing to do with what you do, but you're connecting with them. And the key to that is when they come on your podcast, they get exposed to your audience. Conversely, if you encourage them to share this podcast afterwards, it exposes you to their community and your network expands exponentially. Super powerful. So I want to talk a bit about video podcasting. When podcasting started, it was just audio. Again, they kind of took the roadmap of what radio was and found another way to make radio happen. But when videos when video podcasting became more of a thing, it again humanized your brand and opened up other opportunities. So video in general, statistically speaking, gets 1,200% higher share rate than text and images combined. Being able to get on multiple channels is also key. If you have just an audio podcast, you're not really going to post that to YouTube or TikTok, right? Because if you made a video of that, which is going to kind of be nothing, or a static screen, it's boring. That's not very compelling content. And it goes without saying, if you make a video podcast, you could extract the audio from that and also get an audio podcast. You can't go the other way around, obviously. Stronger connection, as I mentioned before, they're watching your facial expressions and your body language, and that enhances relatability. Hybrid monetization. A lot of what I'm covering today is for everyone here to consider the power of podcasting to amplify your business. In the marketing sense, that's to get your message out and connect with people. In addition to that, and I say it this way because what I'm about to say might be more if you were doing this as a hobby, I guess. But when it comes to monetizing the podcast itself, not focus so much on it as a marketing tool, but it as its own revenue stream. When you're doing video, you have more opportunities to monetize it. You know, if you were doing a video, an audio-only podcast, and you had a sponsorship spot, that's kind of like a radio ad. You could say it, or you could play the little jingle, and it comes and goes. You could still do that in video, but you could also have commercials in there, whether you're the star of that commercial, as you see in a lot of YouTube content, or they supply something. That's the power of what you get when you do a video podcast versus audio only. And then, of course, it's visual storytelling. If you're doing a podcast that might talk about products, you're going to have guests that represent products, and they can bring that product on camera. Being able to see it and play with it and talk about it goes way further than just talking about it through an audio podcast. So for business growth, let's talk about lead generation. You can do lead generation with podcasting. Very often you'll listen to a podcast and someone will say, blah, 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 blah. If you'd like to learn more, click the link below or go to suchandsuch.com because I have a free ebook to give you. The free ebook, as we all know, is a lead magnet opportunity, right? It's a free ebook, but when they go to the website to get it, they need to key in their name, email address at minimum to download that ebook. And they're happy to give it to you for free because you gave them your contact information and they could further market to you. So you could think about how you could use it that way, whether it's a free ebook, whether it's a free consultation. Those are popular things that are often offered through podcasting, and it leads to lead generation. Content repurposing. This plays into the high ROI of podcasting mentioned earlier. You can take those, let's say 20, 30 minute long episodes and cut them into multiple clips. The nice part about that is you can use that before the podcast goes live to tease it, whether that's on LinkedIn, Instagram, as a Facebook reel, as a TikTok. You can split it up when the podcast goes live to promote that it is live and include some important snippets from what you guys covered. And obviously you can do it post-launch to remind people that it's there, talk about the podcast brand in general, and get people to subscribe and tune in for future episodes. Very powerful. You could also take that, transcribe what was said, and turn that into a written blog. And if you've ever gone through the exercise of marketing with blogs, you know that you can take that blog content and then strip that down into multiple social media content pieces and then take that and make a newsletter out of it. So you can get all of this stuff from what was said in a conversation on a single podcast episode. Very powerful. Customer retention, again, as mentioned before, the inherent nature of subscribing to a show and the expectation of another episode coming out next week, 2 weeks from now, keeps people coming back. Brand partnerships through ads. Obviously, that's another revenue stream opportunity. And then there's the analytics aspect. In marketing, we try our best to measure what we can, and podcasts are no different. It would be interesting to you if you had a guest on how their episode performed versus another guest. And the fact that you have that kind of analytic information allows you to pivot. Maybe you need to write your descriptions a little differently, your headlines a little differently, promote the podcast a little differently. The analytics are baked into a lot of these platforms where you're distributing your content, and that's key. So how do you start? Super high level. This first step is to define your niche and your target audience. If you do something, I'll use myself as an example. So I'm a marketer. I can talk about marketing. Maybe that's my niche. Maybe I want to get more specific than that. Maybe I want a podcast just on marketing podcasts or website development or something to that effect. Decide kind of where you want to go with that, and therefore what your target audience might be. You're always going to think about your target audience because you may want to do something because it's cool and fun, but when you think about who your audience is, it may not resonate with them, and you're going to need to adjust accordingly. Step 2 is to plan your content. So that's the topics you're going to talk about, the format, and maybe that's just audio only, maybe it's audio and video, and of course the frequency. And the frequency is key because you want to be consistent. You don't have to put a podcast out every week. Some people do. Some people do more than once a week. If you can't commit to once a week, then you do 2 weeks. We're even starting off once a month, but figure out what you're comfortable with doing realistically and start with that. The third step is to invest in equipment. I put the word quality in there. I really should have made it bold and dancing because to me, that's super important. On a hobbyist level, doing this is totally fine and very common and the lowest barrier to entry because we all have one of those in our pockets. They're in effect a podcast studio, but they're not. You know, we're here because we're talking about using podcasting for business. And for me, quality is key. And as a matter of fact, it's well understood that audio quality is even more important than video quality, as important as video quality is, right? You can watch a poorly, let me rephrase that. You could watch a low-res video if the audio is good, but you could watch a super crisp, high-res video, and if the audio is garbage, you kind of get uncomfortable and you tune out. So that's key. So that means you need to buy the right microphones or utilize the right microphones. And obviously, camera quality is important too. Back when podcasting first started, especially when video stuff first started with podcasting, it was generally understood that we're going to do a lot of this on our phone, but cell signals aren't very good, and streaming high bandwidth content like video is tough. So you might see lower 480, 360 resolution content come through that. And back then that was okay. Now it's really not. It's understood we all have enough bandwidth to do this appropriately. There's enough Wi-Fi hotspots that even if the cell signal was, we're going to hop on Wi-Fi and consume it accordingly. The resolution on these screens are so crisp that if you use poor camera equipment, it's going to show. And if you're like me and you watch YouTube on your 4K television at home because you can't buy a TV that's not 4K these days, you'll notice a difference also. And I say all of that because we're doing this for business. You want to represent your business in the best possible light, right? Quick aside, I was having a conversation with someone the other day about presentation, and you only have one shot to make a first impression, or however that phrase goes. And I said, if you're good at what you do, if you walk into a room, if you were doing what I was doing right now, tank top, flip-flops, doesn't change what's in your head. But everyone in the room might be like, why is he dressed like that? Especially if they didn't know who I was, right? I never met this guy. That's my first impression. Tank top, flip-flops. He thinks he's going to the beach. He knows what he's talking about, but is he really professional? Is he really going to represent my brand? We dress accordingly to make that right first impression because we take business seriously. I'm making that as a parallel to why quality in your podcast is important. If you're putting out garbage, but you're really well established, people are going to dismiss you very often because of that. And that's a wasted opportunity because you have important things to say, just as an aside. And that also plays into step 4, taking into consideration the opportunity to record and edit professionally. If you don't want to spend the money investing in the right equipment, or you don't want to take the time to learn how to use it correctly, consider hiring someone else. Step 5 is where you're going to publish it. So platforms like Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, huge. So pro tip, every podcast that I do always goes on YouTube. I'm always doing video podcasts, right? So that always goes on YouTube. Then I'll share it on Spotify. Spotify creates the RSS feed that you could then share with Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio. I also go to Amazon Music's podcasts. The significance of that is I upload to YouTube. That's effort number 1. Effort number 2 is to upload to Spotify. Then I'm done. Once it's in Spotify in process, it shows up at Apple. It shows up on iHeartRadio. It shows up on Amazon. So It's a cool way to be efficient with how you do this. And then the last step is, of course, to promote that you actually did this. I have an episode. Let me get the word out there. Social media, huge for that. Huge opportunity there to share that information. Emailing it to people, putting it on your website, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that I try to do when I have someone that I have on my podcast, will either take a selfie or I'll take a screenshot of some of the raw footage and just put that out there saying, hey, we just did this. Tag them. They're resharing it. Their network is following it. My network is following it. We're expanding each other's networks and we're creating some hype, some buzz for the episode that's about to come out. Very easy to do. So when it comes to the podcast episode itself and crafting something engaging, you want to hook your audience at the beginning. This is a great opportunity to explain what you're talking about, right? So if you have a guest, you're going to introduce the guest, you're going to introduce what they do, and start getting into, well, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. I don't know what the statistics are, but there's only that first 30 seconds to a minute when someone tunes into something for them to decide if they're going to continue beyond that, right? So cut to the chase as far as explaining what we're going to cover, and then you can slow down and cover it at the right pace. Be consistent. As I mentioned before, if you're going to commit to doing it weekly, do it weekly. If you're going to commit to doing it bi-weekly, do it bi-weekly, but be consistent because you want the audience to know when this stuff is going to come if you want them to anticipate it being launched. Add value. Focus on solving problems or answering questions. I'm going to put an asterisk on that one because sometimes your podcast can simply be entertaining, right? You don't have to provide any value other than the value of entertainment. But since we're business people and we're talking about this in the context of business, and we want to show ourselves as authorities in our space, knowledgeable people, bring that value to the table. Have your guests talk about what they're an expert at. Ask them questions about their expertise to dive a bit deeper, knowing that the viewer is going to appreciate walking away with that knowledge from this experience. Obviously, again, leveraging video. I can't highlight that enough. That's key. And then include a CTA, a call to action. So whether it's simply, thanks for coming on the show, how do our listeners get a hold of you? And they plug their phone, web address, email address, whatever. Or if you're doing a solo podcast or you want to just plug yourself, include that in there. Call to action could also be, don't forget to visit turn1studio.com for a free consultation, such-and-such.com for a free ebook, etc. And then rolling your lead gen. So amplifying your reach, again, we kind of touched on this already. Yeah, there's not too much here that I didn't cover, except encouraging reviews and ratings on platforms. Those go a long way, right? With everything you do, whether it's podcasting or any service that you provide, ask people to do a review for you. If it's through a podcast, they'll be doing that on Spotify. They'll be doing that on Apple. They'll be hitting hopefully 5 stars. If it's anything else in marketing, you're going to want to ask them to do that through Google reviews. That goes a long way. Many of you are familiar with Molly Barnett, the AI expert. She was talking about how AI does leverage reviews and how it figures out when it's going to promote you versus something else, because it's not following the SEO styled algorithms that general search engines do. So reviews are super huge. Plus, it's social proof, right? If you go on there for whatever it is, a podcast or anything else, and you see that 30 people gave it 5 stars, you're more compelled to listen because these 30 people that you don't know anything about had convinced you that this is worth tuning into. Super powerful. And again, collaborating with your guests to cross-promote. Can't emphasize that enough also. If you have a guest on there, is that a question?
Yeah. I just had a quick question. For the SEO, is there a best file that should be for everybody on YouTube, everybody on Spotify, and on Apple? Is there a best file that should be put onto the website?
Well, the answer is similar to how you would do a portion of SEO in website development. You want to include the keywords that people are likely to search. You're also going to make sure that you include keywords relevant to your guests. John Dolan, off-main marketing. We talked about email marketing, phrases like that. When you think about what the value is to the listener that we talked about a couple of slides ago, if you broke that value down into keywords, those would be important keywords to include in the description, in the headline, right? In the case of YouTube in particular, you can put tags in there up to 500 characters. Make sure those tags, which are effectively keywords, mirror that as well. There's also a cool little hack with YouTube also. In the description itself, you can put in up to 3 hashtags that also connect from a keyword perspective with what you're talking about. So doing all of that goes a long way.
Cool.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
And kind of like continuing, does file size matter? Because I know like the photos, you want the smallest so it takes less time to load, things along those lines, and that pushes your website a little bit.
Fantastic question. The answer is yes, but no. Meaning that yes, file size is always a factor, but it's not your problem. For years, I've been a proponent with convincing clients to put videos on YouTube, and we would embed it from YouTube onto their website. And the main reason why I wanted them to do that is because YouTube does a fantastic job of throttling the bandwidth of that content for the device, right? If I bring it up on my phone and I'm on a weak-ish signal, right, it's going to automatically downgrade the quality so that my experience is still smooth. So when it comes to what Spotify is doing and what Apple's doing, they're doing the same thing. So you upload your best work. I'm sometimes uploading close to 20 gigs worth of footage in one clip to YouTube, and I let them figure it out. And it'll take a few hours to process, but that's okay. They always figure it out. It always comes out fine. And then any viewer that wants to check it out can choose in the little gear which resolution to tune into. Good point. Yes.
So if you're embedding like a Spotify player onto your site for your episode, do search engines pick up anything from that?
They will pick up the fact that it's there and what it is. I don't believe the search engines will kind of consume your content, right? Listen to your podcast and pull out information from it. And that's where making sure your description is comprehensive and intentionally keyworded, if that's English, really makes a big difference. Yeah. So some common pitfalls for podcasting. Hopefully by highlighting this, you could avoid some of these. Inconsistent posting, as I mentioned before. When you start to build up that head of steam with a community and they're ready and anxious for your next episode, and then you just go dark, that's no bueno. That's easy to avoid because most of the stuff that you can do, and this is podcast specific, but I'm going to make the assumption that most of what you're going to do is somewhat evergreen. If you're not talking about something super topical today, there's no reason why you can't gang up 1 or 2 months worth of recordings in like a day or two. Just put in the work, record 4 episodes, 8 episodes over 1, 2, 3 days at the beginning of the month, and then just schedule them out for the rest of the month. That guarantees you can go on vacation, you can get sick, something happens, and your podcast still goes out consistently. So that's easy to avoid. Poor audio and video quality, as mentioned before, that's huge. You don't want to put out content that's uncomfortable to listen to. One area where I see this happen often is when people, if it's a podcast style where it's just 2 remote people and it's over Zoom or one of the other platforms that do podcasting remotely, you're at the mercy of your laptop setup and their computer setup that you have no control over. And sometimes the audio quality, certainly the video quality, is pretty poor. So you want to be mindful of that. If there are opportunities to circumvent that, try to do it. For example, if you're doing a podcast with someone across the country, having them fly in to do this is highly unlikely. But if you can get them to do this through your laptop, but maybe also have them record even on their iPhone, on the good side of the iPhone, right? You can take that footage afterwards and marry it up. You could sync up the audio so you can cut from that to that and at least introduce some good, better quality stuff, right? Especially if they could put the camera right on top, and you can use this exclusively because they're still kind of looking into it, and it gets you over that hurdle of working remotely. Lack of promotion, huge pitfall. There's no sense in going through the exercise of doing a podcast episode if no one's going to listen to it or no one's going to watch it, right? You have to get it out there, even if it feels uncomfortable. Promoting yourself in that way you have to do it for the product. Put it out there. People are going to be happy to see that you're doing this and that you alerted them to it. You need to promote. And then content overload. Just stay focused on your niche. That's not to say that if you do a podcast on this, you can't go off on a tangent. Just make sure you come back, right? If they're tuning in because they want to listen to marketing, they want to listen to sports, they want to listen to video production, whatever your podcast is about, make sure that you're serving your audience and not going too far in left field. So I wanted to get just a little bit nerdy for a second and share how I... Are we laughing at the awesome diagram?
That was on Nicky.
Oh,
You didn't know what.
Realize.
Oh. So I hope you don't mind me using you as an example. You were the last podcast of mine to go live. So I'm using myself as an example here. This is not to say this is the only way you should do a podcast. Obviously, everyone can develop their own style. This is just a style that I have found success with because of the versatility, and I feel like it adds interest. So I do a 3-camera shoot, and these are the 3 angles that I get. I get a wide angle, which is us, which in this high-tech diagram is this camera getting the participants, right? That's the wide shot. And then I have 2 tight camera angles, as you can see in those screenshots, that shoot diagonally. I mentioned earlier a talking head video, super powerful in marketing. They're generally under 2 minutes. You're staring right at the camera because you're looking at your audience and you're sharing some sort of insight. It's very powerful. This is not that. You can have a podcast where you're the only person on to do that. That's fair. But generally, if you're not the only person on the podcast, you're having a conversation. And inherent in what this is the unconscious expectation that I, as a viewer, am not part of the conversation. I'm an observer of the conversation, right? So when I'm looking at this, these 2 people are talking. I'm finding what they're saying to be interesting, hopefully. But I'm not interacting with them. I'm sitting there, and when the guest on the left speaks, right, it's kind of like a tennis match. When the ball is on the left side, I'm looking that way. And the more he's speaking, the more I'm interested in what she has to say, the more focused I am on that. These camera angles are mimicking that as best as I can to mimic how we would interact as humans in real life. The other reason I do that, well, there are 2 significant reasons why I do this, in addition to that. The next one is that it's just more visually interesting. You know, a lot of podcasts are just 1 camera, and that's fine, but after a while it can get fatiguing. So cutting to the different angles are just more interesting. As a producer of podcasts, I'm kind of directing you as a director to this shot when she's speaking, this shot when I'm speaking, etc. But the last reason why it's super key is from an editing perspective. If someone says something that they would rather retract and it not go out, because this isn't live, right? If they say something and they just kind of stumble over their words, or if they tell a story and they're like, you know what, that story stinks, let me tell another story. I can cut to another angle and better mask that cut, right? It's a lot more natural when people take that beat for me to cut angles and then cut all that footage out and start where they want it to start. So from a production standpoint, it's super duper powerful to have those extra angles to play with, and it makes it a whole lot more interesting. So some final thoughts. Try to be interactive with your podcasts. Ask listeners to take polls and engage you with Q&A sessions. Now, that could be live, but that could also be something that I mentioned in this episode that I'll address the answers and the questions for in the next episode, which is also a great way to get them to come back to the next episode. Video podcasts, of course, combining visuals with audio, getting yourself onto YouTube and beyond. Those are the TikToks and Instagram Reels of the world. And then finding these niche opportunities to find niche communities. You know, being hyper-targeted with your content for specific audiences can be super powerful. You know, I talked about the 100 million people that tune into podcasts. That's great. Your goal should not be to get 100 million people following, because not 100 million people are not going to find what you have to say all that interesting. What you want is quality over quantity. Find your niche, dive deep in that, and you'll get the right listeners for that. And if you're turning this into a marketing opportunity, a lead gen opportunity, those are the folks you want anyway. So any questions?
When it comes to like authenticity, do you find that gets minimized or scrutinized, being that it's business related, that you're kind of like, it's almost like the assumption that you're already selling. And if you're selling, that you're losing that sort of like authenticity because you're asking something from the listener. Right. Rather than being like a personal brand that is discussing part of your business, and developing that relationship that will eventually, hopefully, then asking for more from you. Right. So how do you balance that in that sense?
That's a great question because that has nothing to do with podcasting, right? That has nothing to do with any particular medium. That has to do with how you market yourself. So I'm a big proponent for marketing through education, the inbound marketing technique or concept of marketing, which means that you're not going in for the hard sell. That's icky and that's uncomfortable. And frankly, I say that for the salespeople, right? If you look at where they are, if you're into the funnel concept or the buyer's journey concept, the sale should happen afterward, later on in that journey, because they've already identified they have a problem. They started to identify solutions, possible solutions for that problem. Then they start to identify who could solve that problem. And then they get into the decision-making process of, well, who am I going to go with, right? That's later on when you're in the sales process. When you're doing a podcast like this and you're a guest, or especially if you're a host, right? It'd be kind of weird if you're promoting yourself the whole time and not letting your guests do their thing. You should just be having a conversation to share insight and knowledge. If you can educate your prospect, if you're even going to consider them a prospect at that point, you're making them a better sales opportunity for you, right? An educated buyer is a better buyer because they can appreciate what you offer and maybe the price point that you're at. They better understand that. But you're building that authenticity to the start of your question because you're giving them that insight. You're not asking for anything in return. I'm telling you that this is how you can do this better. You can go with me to do it because if I'm such an expert, chances are I'm in that business. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking you to just have a better understanding of how this works. Whether it's me, someone else, or you're doing it yourself, take that knowledge and run with it. But because you're just being genuine about it, because you are, there's a high likelihood they would reach out to you for help because they see you have the knowledge. You weren't doing the hard sell. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, and I think this conversational aspect of a podcast helps with that. I don't think if you're doing a 20-minute podcast, you can sell for 20 minutes. Like that would be fatiguing even for yourselves.
Right.
If you have a good host that asks the right kind of question, not even a good host. It's not like you need a talent to be a host as much as you need to care. I need to be genuinely interested in what I'm asking you, and then the questions kind of come up, right? I'm genuinely curious in what you do. So let me follow that question up with this question. People see that. Yes, sir.
What is your approach to choosing guests?
I wish I had a really sharp scientific answer. Either they ask or I ask them. So for my podcast, the premise was simple. I started to just realize that I meet a lot of people and they do some interesting stuff. So the premise was, let me bring them on and learn more about their business. Right? I always start my podcast with something to the effect of, Turn One Studio podcast, where we bring on business professionals that we know and admire. We don't really talk about marketing unless what they're talking about requires or promotes, prompts a marketing related answer. It's literally just, I like the people that I meet and I'm curious to learn more about them. And that's that. So, I would hope that people would appreciate the video and production quality of my podcast because video production is part of what I offer. I never talk about it, but if that's a takeaway, conscious or unconscious, that's cool. So that's really the idea. It's really just to connect with other people. It gives me content, gives them content, grows the network, and then it does lead to business because I'm not being salesy about it. It's an afterthought. I'm demonstrating what I can do, and you could put the pieces together whether what I do is something you need now or not. Yes, sir.
Can we turn that question back to the brand chef because he has a podcast and I like to understand how he chooses his guests?
Ooh, okay, that's a good follow-up. How do you choose your guests?
On the spot. So our guests, we basically choose. So I have a podcast with Arthur Jermaine, a brand telling podcast where we talk about brand stories. So our guests ideally are brand builders that have gone through a transformation in their brand. They're not just beginning. They have gone through pains. They've gone through decision making. They've gone through transformation, and they're on the other side. And telling your story is always a unique story. And it's always fun asking them questions, seeing what led them to make this decision over that decision, and how it'll.
Cool. So you're helping people avoid potholes in their journey by getting people that have gone down that road before.
As a side effect. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yes.
So how do you set expectations as far as building an audience is concerned? Because people are going to attribute effort to like results. And sometimes finding that audience and building that audience will take time, right? So what is the commitment level that you're kind of like giving them as the expectation in which they can judge at a certain period whether it's
Whether it's worth it or not. I got to be honest with you, it's going to sound like a punt. That's a very difficult question to answer because so much of it will rely on what you're talking about. The answer to that question, which isn't really the answer, but the answer is going to be what they get out of it. That's not, what is the metric, the KPI for success? If the answer is, well, I want to have as many views on my podcast as Joe Rogan, dude, I'm going to disappoint you, right? He's been doing it a long time. He was an established brand before that, whether you like his podcast or not. He's often the number one, and that's a very hard target to hit. But that's what people know. So people think, well, view count is key, right? As I mentioned before, with marketing in general, quality should always trump quantity, right? So we have to talk about what that KPI is. If you're in the business of, you have an Etsy store and you make t-shirts, not knocking anyone that does, but I'm trying to think of a low dollar thing, widget, right? The number of those t-shirts that I would have to sell to justify the cost to do a podcast the right way, that might be a tougher ROI to hit, obviously. That's not to say you couldn't. You could go viral with your podcast and sell a lot of t-shirts, right? An argument could be made they're so cheap to buy, you're going to sell a lot of bulk, whatever. But if you have a higher priced ticket widget, you probably don't have to sell many of them for this to work. So it becomes less about how quickly you grow your audience and more about what that audience looks like, the quality of that audience, the makeup of that audience, and what you can do with it with calls to action to,
Right. And sort of like what I like to add to that is to let people understand this is evergreen. Evergreen.
Thank you.
So, like you may have a topic today that may not resonate with people at the moment, but all of a sudden someone mentions it and now it becomes a topic of discussion. And now you can reintroduce this podcast discussing that topic and possibly gain your followers out.
Yeah. Hold on, Adam. I love that point. I meant to mention evergreen earlier, and did I? Okay. Well, let's talk about it again anyway, because it's so significant. Again, if you're not talking about something topical and it can be evergreen, now that changes the conversation of what ROI looks like. If you look at it through simply this one episode cost this cost and it did this viewership, you're missing out on the whole point of this thing. That episode is this viewership today, but because it's evergreen, you'll see those numbers. Again, as long as you're talking about something interesting, those numbers will grow forever as long as you add it up. That's just the podcast. If you take that and convert it into a video that you embed on your website, again, depending on what you sell, how many widgets is that video selling for you forever? Because it's evergreen content. Slicing and dicing that, how much social media content are you getting from that podcast episode? If you look at what it costs to do social media marketing, especially if it's video-based, what it costs to do videos for your website that are just for your website, and the costs of doing podcasts and everything else that you do, you'd find this to be very inexpensive because of how much you get from that one exercise. If you're doing a 20-minute conversation and you're smart and you know what you're talking about in your business, think of all the pearls of wisdom that you can cut from that and get how many videos from that. And because they're evergreen videos, I can share that today and then maybe go back and reshare it 3 to 6 months later. and again and again and again. It's wild. Yes.
So I would imagine for your clients, you're creating that when you're repurposing it for the social media. So you're creating the podcast for them, then you're helping them to identify which snippets, and you're actually producing those snippets. Or do you have people just do this on their own, and what kind of platform would they use?
Well, I'm glad that you asked. So for my company, the premise of what we're doing is to make it as turnkey and white glove as possible, right? So what I mean by that is you can find studio space where you can just rent the space, cameras and microphones, and go, right? And then you leave with that footage. You have to learn what to do with it, edit it to get it the way you want it to be, and then do all the things that you just mentioned, right? That's not what my space is. My space is for those that just want to sit and talk. They sit and talk. We handle the pre-production, meaning we're consulting with you on what the show could look like, how often we want to do it, create the graphics for you, do the recording, do the editing, produce the snippets, even help you distribute it. So you, in theory, don't have to do anything. We're more than willing and happy to do all those things for you, and that's the experience. And just to throw a little light on Greco over there are a lot of buildings in Hauppauge. I specifically chose this building, which is, I can tell you, not the cheapest building, because I wanted it to be that level of experience for people that wanted to use this studio and just meet in my office in general, right? If you're a marketing director for a company and you want to bring down your executives, you're not going to feel embarrassed bringing them to this building. You're certainly not going to feel embarrassed coming into my space and dealing with us producing the podcast for you. That was kind of the premise of what we did. So yeah, that's kind of, the level we wanted to play at for this.
Great.
Yes.
I was just gonna say, when you're on a podcast or you're on,
Any podcast, going back to the view question, if you get asked to be on a podcast, that's a great opportunity for you to, yes, cross promote that podcast, but think about the people that want to know your credibility, that you meet at a networking event, or you want to email them, and you don't want the email via traditional email. Utilizing this as a piece of marketing material is an extremely valuable way to endorse yourself in a way. So like when I go on a podcast, I want to understand the end in mind of the podcast and why the questions and what the questions are and so forth, because I want to use this selfishly as a way for me to promote myself, to whether it's sharing it on social media, whether it's putting it in an email. But depending on the different podcasts that you're on, they're going to speak to different audiences, and using that as a piece of marketing material for yourself. So I don't care if a podcast I don't on gets 2 views. The way that I'm able to use that content and spin it, the evergreen, that's where the real power comes into play. And when you do a podcast with someone like Eliud, and you have different snippets for social media content, whether something broken down to a 1-minute clip or a 10-minute clip, think about how you can use that in so many different ways. A lot of people don't utilize it as a way to leverage their credibility. You're talking about yourself and someone's interviewing you. It's such a phenomenal way to show yourself off without working hard at it.
Yeah. And, to piggyback on what Adam's saying, it's a great opportunity to show yourself off. It's also a fantastic opportunity to show your personality. If you did your own, hi, I'm Eliud Custodio, and you posted that on your website and you talked about how you're into classic cars, pickleball, whatever your thing is, people, they're not that interested. People do business with people that they like. And being able to have a conversation with someone on a podcast where you're being asked what you like to do for fun, and you get to talk about, I love to dance, I love pickleball, I'm into cars. Now you're sharing that information without being weird about it because you're being asked. So they learn the information without you having to shove it down their throat, and they connect with you in that way. Yes.
The introduction to the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
How essential is it? Because I see guys who just have almost a blank screen and then they just start talking. And I see guys who do real produced stuff.
Yeah.
And whether it's essential or not, and how long should it be? What's the optimum? Because you can lose people.
Correct.
Okay.
So we'll go backwards. We'll Tarantino this one. So the lengths, as short as you can get away with making it, because as I mentioned earlier, they're only going to tune in for 30 seconds to a minute before they decide if they're going to stick with this or not, right? So you could have a really catchy theme and all this cute stuff, just keep it short. you should have a catchy theme or something that is consistent from one episode to the next, especially since even if you're doing a video podcast, but they're listening to it audio only, like on Apple Podcasts because they're going for a walk or they're at the gym. When they hear that, tune in. And keep in mind, they may be listening to a couple of podcasts that they subscribe to. And when that last one finished, yours comes up next. The minute they hear that audio cue, because they've been hearing it episode after episode, they know it's you. So short, catchy. As far as it being produced or not, again, I'm a huge proponent for going high quality, but make it match what it is that you're talking about. You know, if you're into, I'm trying to think of a weird example. If you collect baseball cards, I don't know. Maybe you're not going to have it's more of a hobby thing, right? Maybe your intro is not as pop. Maybe that's a horrible example, but you get my point.
Yeah.
Make it match what it is that you're doing.
Or intro to a baseball card.
Right. If you're going to have a show on baseball, you're probably going to have an energetic intro. You're not going to play some classical music because that would just be off brand for what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. But it's pretty much essential that you have something to grab so it becomes identifiable.
Yes, an intro and outro is key. And your outro should at the very least include some sort of CTA, whether it's subscribe for the next episode of the show, visit suchandsuch.com to learn more, whatever. Just end with something that asks them to do something. Even if it's just, give us a 5-star rating, we'd really appreciate it. Yes.
You mentioned sponsorship earlier. I'm from an ad sales management background. I'm always into commercialization. How much of that, and how important or significant can that be? Because you really didn't mention it much after that. It's like, hey, you could do that.
Yeah.
Because mostly you're talking about this as a marketing tool.
Correct.
Maybe not wanting to cross the streams. So tell me your feelings on sponsorship, how significant it can be for someone that's doing this as a on position.
I mean, obviously, if you can make some money doing this, cool, right? It's another revenue stream. But again, I'll just use myself as an example. My intent is not just to monetize it. If that happens, that's great. I feel like I need a much bigger audience before I would even pursue something like that. But if your goal is for that to be the product, then yes, you should be marketing your way to ramp up eyeballs as quickly as you can so that you can court people for sponsorship. They're going to be looking at those metrics to say, well, if I give you money and you mention my brand, how many people are likely going to see it? Just like any other platform, right? It's like running an ad in a magazine. So is it important? It can be. Even if you're not interested in doing that for the money value, it also gives you street cred. If you can get a sponsor on there, just being affiliated with that, showing that someone found you important enough to sponsor, elevates your brand. So that could be an opportunity too. That could be a, pro bono or value add, some sort of non-monetary exchange type sponsorship where, they get some exposure and then you get that connection. Yes.
One statement question. Anyone who hasn't checked out your studio, are we allowed to go?
Oh yeah. When we're done here, if anyone wants a quick tour, it's literally across the hall. And I'd love to walk you guys through what I have. And if you want to talk tech, I'll dork out with you.
Yeah, we should definitely do that. And I just want to point out one thing I remember from our March, that's when Molly was going over AI. She talked about a tool called the Focus AI that takes a lot of foreign videos, podcasts, as a good example, and it identifies the most compelling parts on the video. It automatically creates, perfect snippets for a short thing.
Yeah. I tried it. I found because one of the cool things about Opus is that it does the captioning underneath, which you would do in different styles. The significance of that is, if you're like me, I'll probably hop onto Instagram when I'm somewhere where I cannot have audio. If I'm online as a bank or something, I'm on it because I'm bored, but I can't play the audio. Having the captions are key. It's great at except for the spelling of my name, it's great at transcribing that into captions. But it's just my personal experience. It did a poor job guessing where to do the cuts.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Maybe I confused it because it's a multicam shot. Like sometimes it'll start a cut too many frames too early before it changes to the other cam. Like it botched it up, and I didn't like that at all. Hopefully you get better, and being AI, self-learning, it should in time, but.
How does that work as far as like rights are concerned? Are you, in essence, like giving up your rights to that content to
The AI program.
Well, it's not taking it and distributing it. When you
Is it still a sense of like of ownership? Like, are you giving some sort of like ownership in which they can now use that content?
well, that's a fabulous question. I have no idea because I never read all the terms that, like no one does, right?
We were like, right?
Yeah. So what? Right. So you put your file in there, it cuts it up, and it gives it back to you, and you assume, well, I'm walking away with this. Did it ingest all that info to learn, and does it retain it? That's an excellent question. I don't know, but that's AI in general, right? Yeah.
Well, not all AI. I mean, there's some AI programs that I work with Adobe, their AI system, and there's certain AI that grabs your stuff, and then there's other AI out there that reads your stuff but doesn't read and retain your stuff. So there's different types of AI.
That's true. I think all AI in general, though, could take into consideration what each face that goes up, as one example, right? It's possible I may see my face on an ad one day that's AI produced or something that looks pretty close to it just because I'm using a platform like that.
You gotta just know what the platform retains. You know, like every company has different requirements and regulations. So
Yeah, it's still a bit wild, wild west.
yeah, it still is, but some companies are trying to steer in the copyright free so it doesn't, infringe on anything.
Yeah. Well, look, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and it's now 10 o'clock. I'd love to keep talking to you guys about this if you want to stick around. If you want to see the space, we could do that too. Definitely eat some food that George brought over. John, thank you again for the space. Appreciate it. And thank you all for coming down.